I miss this, I have to say. Well, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I want to say a few words about this week's Torah portion and a possible connection to this weekend of commemoration, this weekend of working to make a difference and celebrating the life and the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Most people see this week's Torah portion, B'Shalach, as a celebration of the defeat of Pharaoh and Egypt. And while the text of Shira, the Song of the Sea that was so beautifully chanted, is triumphalist in its tone and tenor, it also provides us with a stark message, a warning against the worship of power and self-aggrandizement. B'Shalach is the grand culmination of the conflict between Pharaoh and Moses. And if you recall, the events that brought us to the shores of the Red Sea are powered by two very different figures. On the one hand, we have Moses, the reluctant prophet, called by God to challenge Pharaoh. And Pharaoh, the power-drunk absolute ruler of Egypt. And if we look at the meta theme of this story, however, it's more than simply a power struggle between Moses and Pharaoh. It is a clash between two world views. One in which morality and compassion are preeminent, and one where power, oppression, and inequality reign. Looking closely at not just the narrative of Shira, the Song of the Sea, but all that came before it, we see that Moses and Pharaoh are not the main protagonists. It is a story of triumph of righteousness over idolatry. God and Pharaoh are fighting, even though we know and understand that it is not a fair fight. Pharaoh's hardened heart is his downfall. And many commentators have written about the ethical quandary posed by God deliberately hardening Pharaoh's heart and how this ultimately led to his downfall. But looking carefully at the text, we will see that for the first 5 of the 10 plagues, it was Pharaoh himself who hardens his own heart. Only after he demonstrated a lack of remorse or compassion or the ability to see that his cause is lost does God ensure his total humiliation and defeat on the shore of the Sea of Reeds that we celebrate this Shabbat. And of course, this weekend we commemorate and celebrate the life of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And in a 1963 sermon from his pulpit at the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Dr. King wrote the following. One moment. He wrote, "Egypt was the symbol of evil in the form of humiliating oppression, ungodly exploitation, and crushing domination. The Israelites symbolized goodness in the form of devotion and dedication to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." And I'll add Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. These two forces were in a continual struggle against each other. Egypt struggling to maintain her oppressive yoke, and Israel struggling to gain freedom from the chains of slavery. And for years the struggle continued. The pharaohs stubbornly refused to respond to the cry of Moses. Plague after plague swept through the pharaoh's domain, and yet they insisted on following their recalcitrant path. This tells us something about evil that we must never forget. It never voluntarily relinquishes its throne. Evil is stubborn, hard, and determined. It never gives up without a bitter struggle and without the most persistent and almost fanatical resistance. But there is a checkpoint in the universe. Evil cannot permanently organize itself. So after a long and trying struggle, the Israelites, through the providence of God, were able to cross the Red Sea and thereby get out of the hand of Egyptians' rule. These beautiful, powerful, moving words still ring true today. For our story of redemption is both ancient and evergreen. The clash between good and evil, right and wrong, the oppressed and the oppressor is never ending. The vision of Dr. King stands as a testament to the necessity for fighting for equality and justice whenever and wherever it is abused. And in today's world, the legacy of the struggle for equality and the fight against evil still plays out in the halls of Congress, in our nation's long history of distrust and demonization of people of color, in the violence playing out in the streets of our cities, in the disinformation that is callously used to manipulate the masses around election fraud, vaccination disinformation, the attacks on women's health, and the myriad of other campaigns designed to intimidate and manipulate vulnerable populations. One would think that given the long lens of history, we would learn from our mistakes and refrain from succumbing to the temptation to use power to subjugate others. But as our people know all too well, the lessons of the past are not easily learned. In Exodus chapter 14, this week's Torah portion, the Egyptians, still mourning after the tragedy of the 10th plague of the death of the firstborn, realize that they have relinquished their control over the Israelites. Forgetting everything they have learned, experienced, and seen, they set out to regain their lost property and their pride. And the text in Exodus 14 reads as follows: When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his courtiers had a change of heart about the people and said, "What is this we have done, releasing Israel from our service?" He ordered his chariot and took his men with him. He took 600 of his picked chariots and the rest of the chariots of Egypt with officers in all of them. And of course, we all know the rest of the story. Pharaoh's army drowned in the Sea of Reeds, and the Israelites marched to freedom. But it was not only Pharaoh who forgot the lessons of history. For immediately, without blinking an eye, after crossing the sea, the Israelites themselves begin to complain about lack of food and water, about their fears of dying in the wilderness. And even though they, like the Egyptians, had personally witnessed God's power and deliverance, they were vulnerable to the very human temptation to see the worst in themselves and in those around them. Evil is always present within ourselves and others. And our Parsha concludes, B'Shalach, with the introduction of a new enemy. Pharaoh has been replaced by Amalek, the one who attacked the Israelites from behind, killing the women and children. And the Torah teaches us in Deuteronomy to both remember and blot out the memory of Amalek, two seemingly contradictory commands. This past week, Steve and I attended the Oneg Study and Ski Conference in Vail, Colorado. This annual gathering of rabbis and cantors, Jewish educators and professionals, is my favorite conference. Not only because of the opportunity to ski with beloved colleagues and friends, but also because of the depth of study and connection that it provides. Of course, this year it was a little different because of the precautions we needed to take in terms of social distancing and masking and not leaving. We created a bubble within ourselves. But this year, Rabbi Elise Frischman, a dear friend, and the editor of our prayer book, Mishkan Tefillah, taught us a Kabbalistic interpretation of the story of Amalek. In the passages I referenced earlier, Deuteronomy 25:17, we find the following: Zachor et asher asalacha Amalek, which literally means, remember what Amalek did to you. And then it goes on to describe how he cut down the weakest from behind. And the commandment to wipe out Amalek follows this remembrance. But I learned another powerful way to understand and translate this message. The Hebrew words, zachor, remember, et asher asalacha, what Amalek did, and then the word lecha, we translate as to you. But if we take that word lecha, and we look at it in another way, as we do in Parashat Lech Lecha, God commands Abraham, Lech Lecha, go forth, go to you. Go to yourself. Go within yourself. Therefore, when God charges us to remember what Amalek did, lecha, to you, notice it's in the singular. But remember, another way to translate it is, remember what Amalek did within you. Think about that. Amalek is not necessarily external. Amalek is within each of us. The capacity to strike out against what is good and fragile in our world and in ourselves lies within every creature, everyone created in God's image. So when we are commanded to blot out the memory of Amalek, we also have to understand that that is to blot out that tendency in ourselves to do the evil that makes the world so incomplete and imperfect. Dr. King understood that. He knew that justice would never be achieved in one fell swoop. The act of liberation, be it from Egyptian bondage, American slavery, Jim Crow, or centuries of fear, prejudice, aggression, must be constantly carried out, and we need to see that capacity in ourselves. When we deny that, we deny God's presence in our lives. And since this is Shabbat Shira, I want to share a song with you that I recently recorded during my sabbatical. It's a song I wrote a while ago, but it's a song that explores that potential within us for good and evil, and it's called Gemini. One side dark, the other light. One loves day and the other night. One can't hear and one lacks sight. One seeks peace and one needs to fight. One seeks comfort, one seeks health. One craves love and the other wealth. One walks tall, one creeps in stealth. One's the dealer, the other dealt. Gemini, oh, it's you and I can't seem to find the way to come together. What's your alibi? The times when you were split in two, the mornings when the light shone through the darkness of your soul in stormy weather. One side dark, the other light. One is slow and the other bright. The truth is never black or white. It's within our grasp and then it's gone from sight. And one learns slowly, one learns fast. But each of us, we must learn at last that if the mold is not recast, the future will repeat the past. Oh, it's a never-ending choice, and if Esau, Jacob's voice, well, you can wrestle with the angels till you finish. And if you triumph in your fight, after battling through the night, when you emerge, you will find your strength diminished. Oh, Gemini, it's you and I can't seem to find the way to come together. Tell me what's your alibi? The times when you were split in two, the mornings when the light shone through, the times when you were split in two, the morning when a light shone through, and the times when you were split in two, the mornings when the light shone through the darkness of your soul in stormy weather. And may we each find the strength and the courage to learn from the legacy of Dr. King and fight the battles within ourselves and within our nation and within our community to call out injustice, evil, and to pressure whenever and wherever we see it. And then, and only then, will our song at the sea be fulfilled. Shabbat Shalom. And we continue now with Alinu.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו